家好久不见。
好久不见，
我们两个已经好久没有在这个画面里面出现了。今天什么风把我们吹来了？有一个大咖来了，博明来了。
对，博明是之前在川普第一任期的他的副国安顾问，然后他也真的是非常非常厉害的这个美中台专家。我觉得当时他也就是在很多的东印太地区的一些协商当中，他都扮演非常重要的角色，而且他是在华府整个非常非常鸽派或是熊猫派的时候，他其实就已经非常清楚中国的这个野心，所以他一直以来都看得很清楚。
博明他在川普第一个任期的时候，其实他扮演了非常重要的角色，
是，
所以这次我们非常荣幸的可以邀请到博明来我们节目。那主要是因为他出了一本新书，这是英文版的《The Boeing Mode》
沸腾的护城河。
对，沸腾的护城河。那他的中文版已经出了，只是我们现在手上还没有。找他来，不只是聊书，其实我们很重要的事情是去了解现在如何看待川普对台湾的很多论述。
因为他实际直接跟川普有这样子的接触，我觉得现在大家也一直在问的问题就是说，我们要怎么打进川普的这个决策圈，要怎么去影响到让台湾议题，尤其最近川普可能在台湾议题上，不管是对台湾的半导体加征关税啊，然后或是说台湾的这个半导体产业偷走了美国的这个工作等等等的，我们都会觉得好像不太知道如何去解读。那我们就请博明来跟我们说，然后也了解说他会怎么样的去建议台湾跟美国去互动，那我们需要释出的讯号是什么。
然后还有博明也是少数几个见过习近平的美国官员。
对。
那所以我们其实在今天也有问博明关于他怎么看待习近平现在身边有没有跟他说实话的人。这一题放到了最后，所以一定要看到最后咯。好，我们就专访开始咯。Welcome 博明 Welcome to our show. Okay, so since you're here, so let's go straight to the issues that Taiwan most concerned about as semiconductor tariff. So we recently heard that President Trump repeatedly remarked that Taiwan steals America's semiconductor industry. And so since you work closely with President Trump in his first term, so based your understanding, how do you think Taiwan should interpret and respond to his repeated remarks?
Sure. Mindy, it's so good to be on your show. Thanks for having me. Jasmine, nice to be with you too. Look, the important thing to remember is that Trump's primary goal is to reindustrialize the United States. So by that, he means he wants manufacturing to come back to the U.S. That includes semiconductors. There was a long period of time when the U.S. was dominant, not only in the design of semiconductors, which is still true, but also in the production of computer chips. And Taiwan developed a superior company, a superior model. It was not theft. It was a highly original approach to building what became one of the most remarkable companies in the world, which was TSMC, Morris Chang's vision. And it simply has made approaches of companies like Intel Corp more obsolete, or at least has left those processes behind. They're a generation behind. A generation is measured just in a couple of years now. Trump uses this language, but what his goal is to bring more manufacturing of semiconductors back to the United States. I think he would welcome TSMC to increase its investments in the U.S. And I actually think that would end up being a good move for TSMC as well as for the United States. TSMC is doing quite well in Taiwan. It's not shrinking here. I've heard people say, "Oh no, is Taiwan going to hollow out?" That's preposterous. The problem right now is that Taiwan is going to tip over from all of the fabs that it's built. It's running out of water for fabs. Electricity is a problem. Even finding people to do the work. Taiwan's having to import people from India and elsewhere just to have enough people to work in the fabs. So I think that Taiwan can continue to grow its fab industry here in Taiwan while also expanding its investment in the United States. If it does that, it actually creates even stronger bonds between the U.S. and Taiwan. So I think it's actually a net positive.
And am I following on that? So I think now global leaders across the world are competing for Trump's attention. And on February 14, President Lai Ching-te, he also responded to President Trump. He reaffirmed Taiwan's commitment to our self-defense. And he also announced that Taiwan will increase our defense spending to 3% of the GDP. He also pledged to expand investments in the U.S. and said he is going to enhance the communications with Washington, D.C. So what do you think about that response? Is that effective? And how do you think President Trump, when he sees it, what does he feel?
Well, look, President Trump, the first thing he often asks about a country, he'll first ask, what is our trade deficit? The second thing he'll ask is, how much is that country, especially if it's a friend of the United States like Taiwan, how much are they spending on defense as a percentage of GDP? It's the first benchmark that he thinks of and that he asks about. So I commend President Lai Ching-te for announcing this special budget to bring, in his words, Taiwan's defense spending above 3% of Taiwan's GDP.
So 3% is not enough, actually.
Well, 3% is an excellent step. That would bring Taiwan in line with where the United States is, right? The United States spends about 3% of GDP on defense. But President Trump is going to want to see that continue climbing. And by the way, President Trump is going to increase defense spending in the United States as well. So both Taiwan and the U.S. should continue to grow their defense spending. This is really important. The worst thing that could happen would be for President Trump to see a headline that says Taiwan is decreasing its defense spending or even just maintaining its current defense spending. He's going to view that as a very negative signal that Taiwan is not serious about its own defense. And we all know that's not true. Taiwan is very serious about its own defense and has made enormous progress in recent years. President Lai has an ambitious, very smart agenda for how to improve Taiwan in terms of whole of society resiliency, but also to increase its fighting capacity. So it's very important that those two things increase so that Taiwan does not send the wrong signal to President Trump. Now, by the way, 3% of GDP may sound like a lot, but it's not. Even in historical terms for Taiwan, in historical terms for the United States, it's actually pretty low. During the Reagan administration in the 1980s, during the last decade of the Cold War, President Reagan was spending 6.8% of American GDP on defense.
That's a lot.
More than double what we're spending now. And that was a very good investment. It allowed us to deter aggression by the Soviet Union and by other aggressive dictatorships, and to bring the Cold War to a peaceful conclusion. So what every dollar that goes into defense is an investment in a peaceful outcome. It's an investment in deterrence. And the alternative is war. And if you look across Asia and arrive in Ukraine, you can see that Ukraine is now spending 37% of GDP on defense because they're fighting for their lives very bravely. That is the last position that we should want to see Taiwan in. We want to prevent a war, not to fight a war. 3% is a modest investment, and it should continue to rise.
Sorry to chime in this part. So because Taiwan's GDP has been increasing in the past few years.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So I think raising, of course, I think 3% is definitely we have to do. But except for raising our defense budget, what other signals do you think we can send to President Trump, to show that we are tough?
Yeah. Well, look, it's true. Taiwan has spent a lot more on defense than it did. I think 8 years ago, Taiwan was spending, I would say right now, from what I've heard, Taiwan's spending about 80% more on defense today than it was 8 years ago. That's excellent. But that's not changing the GDP ratio figure because your economy is growing, which is also a good thing, right? But President Trump is not going to be interested in that nuance. He when he looks at America's spending, when he looks at Taiwan's spending, when he looks at every allied government spending, he's looking at percentage of GDP. It's a given that our economies are going to grow and that we'll be expected to go even further with our spending. So I think that's the first thing that would persuade President Trump that Taiwan is being tough. That's he always looks at how tough is an ally, how tough is an adversary. You want him to look at Taiwan and say, well, the first thing I'm looking at is significant increases in defense spending. Taiwan's getting tougher. But it's other things as well. It's better training. It's more integrated training with the United States, eventually also with Japan. It means that young people who are going through conscription, their year of duty, you want that training to be hard. People take pride in tough training. I've been told that the most effective units in Taiwan, the ones that have trained the hardest, also have the highest retention. People don't want to leave when they're part of a world-beating organization, right? When you know that you're capable and you know that you're good at what you do, you want to stay with it. So it's really important to keep elevating the quality of training to make it more realistic and hard.
Yeah, since you mentioned military culture, that you said Taiwan must adopt new military culture. So which aspect do you think in Taiwan's military culture should be most reformed? And also you mentioned several countries in your book, like Estonia, Finland, Ukraine, and Israel, of course. So what do you think Taiwan could learn from those countries?
Look, it was in the summer of 2023 that I brought some Israeli military leaders to Taiwan to meet with Taiwan military leaders. And those were very fruitful discussions because the world recognizes that Israel is extremely capable. And in fact, it was only a few months after we were in Taiwan that Israel was attacked. It was a 7-front war waged on Israel by terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, but also by their backers in Iran. And here we are a year and a few months later. Israel has vanquished its enemies. At a minimum, you could say it has won this war. And it was able to do so by itself. It needed help in terms of military supplies and diplomatic support from the United States, but the United States didn't actually have to send troops to fight, with the exception of blocking missiles and drones from the Houthi rebels in Yemen. That was the only area where the U.S. was more directly involved. So that's an inspirational example for Taiwan. When those Israeli military leaders were here, the things they wanted to talk to Taiwan about were not weapons systems. Sometimes on the Taiwan side, they wanted to ask about David's sling and the Iron Dome and these famous missile defense systems that are operating, and those are important. But what Israel wanted to raise with Taiwan was training, personnel policies, the reserve force. Why is it so big in Taiwan but not terribly well trained? Israel's model is a smaller reserve, but extremely well trained. And that is the backbone of their fighting force. When they were attacked in October of 2023, people left their jobs working at semiconductor firms and working at startups and working as lawyers and doctors. They put on their uniforms, they knew what to do, and they went and they fought and they whipped their adversaries. Obviously, there are all kinds of differences between Israel and Taiwan, but in terms of fighting spirit, culture, as you put in your question, they're a pretty good model for all of us. I actually think the U.S. should emulate more elements of Israel's defense forces too.
You mentioned spirit. I think it's not about military culture. I think we can expand to the whole society spirit that no matter you're a male or female, when your country was attacked, the immediately thought is that I have to protect my country. So I think that thought built in every Israel people's mind.
Definitely.
Yeah. So then we talk about the society. President Lai mentioned the concept of whole of society defense resilience. And previously, we also interviewed AIT director Raymond Green. Yes. He also mentioned a similar concept. So do you agree with them? And also, could you elaborate the difference between traditional national defense and society defense resilience?
Yeah. So when a country is forced into a war because they're attacked, everyone is affected. It doesn't matter that you have a very professional military, and Taiwan does. Taiwan's active duty military is a very professional force, very capable. The whole society is affected. And so if the society is psychologically prepared, and the way to psychologically prepare is to physically prepare, you have to go through exercises and drills and practice for the shock of a conflict. The more confidence the Taiwan people have in their ability to withstand a blockade or an attack, the more confidence the Taiwan military will have. And the more confidence the Taiwan military has, the more confidence the people have, again, and it's a virtuous cycle. You have a much more formidable fighting capability when the whole society has your back, because the society has prepared. It is gotten used to the idea of rationing power. It's gotten used to the idea that there's not going to be as much easy communication within Taiwan and beyond, that you're going to have to use emergency services, undersea cables that are laid suddenly in an emergency, or satellites that need to be turned on. So people knowing what to do in their own neighborhood to help their neighbors, and how to evacuate a building, how to take care of people who've been injured. All of these things are self-reinforcing and create confidence. And the goal, again, is not to fight, it is to deter. And if Beijing sees that Taiwan is tough, that Taiwan has both the capability to fight, but also the will, which is really the will to fight comes from the society at large, not from the army. An army will fight if its people want them to fight. And so that comes from all of society. If Beijing sees that, Beijing is far less likely to try something as reckless and catastrophic as a blockade or an invasion of Taiwan.
To follow on that, because we are now facing the gray zone tactics from China.
Yeah.
So what's the role of Coast Guard in this whole of society defense?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you do with gray zone tactics is always remember, gray zone tactics are confusing, they're discombobulating, they're psychologically often very effective, but they do not equate to actual control of Taiwan. So as long as you remember that, it's not quite as scary. And that's the first step. It's to not panic because of gray zone. Second thing you want to do is to actually shed light on those activities. So, look at how the Philippines is doing. The Philippines is a small country, very proud. Philippine people are very proud of their sovereignty, and they're not going to give it up lightly just because Beijing is bullying them. Now, Beijing is many times more powerful than the Philippines, but the Philippines shows up, they videotape all of those bullying activities by China to use water cannons to attack Philippine sailors and fishermen. And as a result, Beijing's activities are often counterproductive for Beijing. What it does is it creates a greater sense of solidarity within Philippine society, and a greater sense of national pride and will to defend their interests. It also helps in drawing in support from outside. Now, the United States has been supporting the Philippines It would even be willing to do more if the president of the Philippines asks the United States to do that. He's very impressive. President Marcos is saying the Philippines will take care of itself. We'll receive some help when we need it, but the Philippines is actually doing the activity of pushing back. I think it's very admirable. And the United States is paying very close attention and stands ready to support.
So you mentioned Philippines, and I think the Philippines might need to be one of our allies when the Taiwan Strait has a conflict. So in your book, you also mentioned the importance of allies, and you particularly mentioned about Japan's stance and the defense system built by Australian and European countries. So what do you think those middle power country, what kind of role they will play when there's a contingency happening in Taiwan Strait, and how can they cooperate with United States?
Right. So when it comes to Japan is a special case because Japan's national security is inextricably linked to Taiwan's security. You remember the late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo used to say an emergency over Taiwan is an emergency for Japan, and therefore it's also an emergency for the U.S.-Japan alliance. Japan has a very capable military, very capable navy, and they are your neighbor. They're right here, right? Yonaguni Island, you can see Taiwan Yushan on a clear day
so
from Yonaguni. And so Japan would view this as an emergency. And I think that Japan is really what we call in our book the golden key to unlocking even more effective deterrence. And that's because they have a very capable military. They host significant U.S. troops, both naval and Marines and Army and Air Force. Japan is really would have to be directly involved in a conflict. I would like to see Japan speak more publicly about that reality, that its leaders should speak more publicly about it. They do on occasion, but the more vocal they are about that, the less likely Beijing is to be confused or to miscalculate in thinking that Japan is simply going to sit on its hands, even in the event of a crisis over Taiwan. Japan will not sit on its hands. It will be involved by necessity. So that's the Japan case. Look, Australia is a pretty similar situation because Australia remembers what happened during World War II when you had an aggressive empire expanding. And the only difference now is that that empire is centered in Beijing instead of in Tokyo, and Tokyo is now defending sovereignty and right of way for free and open societies right now. So Australia has been involved in every conflict that the United States has fought since World War I. Since World War I. So it's been 100 years of mateship, as the Aussies call it. And I think that Australia would end up involved by necessity as well. Then you mentioned Europe, and we had Anders Fogh Rasmussen and one of his colleagues write the chapter on Europe, and in the book The Boiling Moat. And if you read the chapter, you'll see that they argue for Europe playing a role partly in doing a better job of protecting Europe from Russian aggression, but also making clear that they will provide diplomatic and financial sanctions to punish China in the event of a conflict. Whether those countries would commit forces or not, I don't think we should count on it, but we should ask Europe to do more inside of Europe to help protect Ukraine, for example. They should be shouldering more of that burden than they currently do.
I want to add one more question. That recently I heard that China has quietly buy allies from Taiwan. I mean, there's more and more country. They say we agree with China's one China principle, like more than 100 countries. So we know that when the Ukraine war happened, a lot of countries put a sanction on Russia. But would it be different, or because the Russia don't have so much allies, so much small or middle power country back up Russia? However, China do have a lot of country stand with them. So what if there's a contingency happen in Taiwan Straits? Those middle or small power country stand by with China. How would that change the dynamic? And do Taiwan has less help as the Ukraine?
Well, look, I would say this: China's campaign to peel away diplomatic allies from Taiwan is an act of psychological warfare more than anything else. It's designed to create a sense of isolation for Taiwan. In practical terms, the countries that would come to Taiwan's aid have remained fairly consistent, right? It's the United States, it's Japan, who we just talked about, Australia, who we just talked about. It's even possible the Philippines would play a constructive role, even if not a combatant role, and some others as well. So I wouldn't be too spooked by that. The biggest problem with these countries that kowtow to Beijing, it increases Xi Jinping's confidence that the world won't interfere or might even back his moves. And I think that would be a miscalculation on his part. That's the problem with it. It's still regrettable. I think these countries don't need to make these concessions. They do it anyway because they feel intimidated themselves. And if they allow Taiwan to get pushed around or Taiwan to be attacked or annexed, Beijing won't stop there. That's very clear. Taiwan is not a destination. It is a jumping off point for Beijing's broader global ambitions. If you read Xi Jinping's speeches, his internal speeches, if you read their internal textbooks on Xi Jinping's 思想, right? All of this makes clear that Taiwan is only the beginning of a global campaign of aggression and subversion, not the end point. So those middle countries that kowtow to Beijing are next. They're on the menu. They will be devoured after Taiwan if we make the mistake of failing to deter a conflict here.
I think this is also a very important narrative that Taiwan needs to tell the world, and this is very clearly elaborated in your book. And as we were talking about Russia and Ukraine war, let's continue talking about this. So now President Trump, he has made it clear that he wants to end this war. And so to ensure that the negotiation do not embolden China, what kind of principle do you think U.S. and Ukraine, they should uphold?
Yeah. So first I would say if there is a ceasefire that is actually durable, that is to say it is a sustainable ceasefire, that would be good for Taiwan. That would mean that the U.S. and Europe are able to put more of their focus of attention on this part of the world. But Xi Jinping does not want that war to end. And I don't think Vladimir Putin wants it to end either. Okay. And so it's still early days for the negotiation. What President Trump is doing right now is showing good faith to Russia that the United States really does want to negotiate a settlement. But the United States doesn't get to decide on its own. It's actually up to Vladimir Putin. And if Vladimir Putin decides that it's in his interest to keep fighting because he wants to conquer all of Ukraine, and I do believe that is his goal, then he's going to keep fighting and he's going to disappoint President Trump. And President Trump will have to take a different approach. I think it's okay that President Trump is trying, that he's saying, look, we're willing to take extraordinary steps to try to bring this to a conclusion. The only way that a ceasefire works is if the security guarantee for Ukraine is ironclad, visible, and immediately present. That is to say, you would need NATO troops, or at least troops, even if they're not commanded by NATO headquarters, if they are troops from NATO countries, and there can be troops from other countries too, but there has to be a coalition that is willing to put its soldiers into harm's way to defend that front line so that the new border, wherever it is negotiated, holds, so that it holds. If there is no security guarantee, the ceasefire will be temporary, and then there will be a devastating second phase of the war. And people who are associated with negotiating a really bad deal will be blamed for that outcome. So President Trump will, I'm sure his advisors will be reminding him that he has to back a good deal, not a one that's destined to fail.
Okay, so I think we almost run out of time, but
Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, but I have a final question. That's my personal worry. You mentioned that deterrence is the most effective way to prevent war, right? But that assumes Xi is still rational, and that assumes that there's a people around him to tell him the truth. However, I think we recently we see a lot of high-level military general was replaced by Xi. I'm worried that we might end up seeing a late-stage Hitler scenario, which is nobody report him the real situation and leading to miscalculation. So do you share the same worry with me?
So first, on the question of his rationality, I've met Xi Jinping several times. I staffed President Trump on all of his many phone calls with Xi Jinping and was in the room there for all of Trump's meetings with Xi Jinping. My estimation of Xi Jinping is that he is not a reckless gambler. Okay, he's willing to take calculated risks, but not unnecessary, reckless risks. So that is good news for deterrence. It means that if we do our jobs, if Taiwan continues to invest, continues to improve, continues to train in realistic ways, continues with President Lai's whole of society approach and his 4-pillar plan, and the United States does its part, and Japan continues to increase its defense spending, which it's been doing. These are good things that strengthen deterrence. The odds that Xi Jinping gambles on a war that he's not confident that he would win, the odds that he does that start to drop, which is what we want. You put your finger on something very important, which is this idea that he lives in an echo chamber, that I think it is true that people are scared to tell him bad news. I think that that's the assessment that I had when I was wrapping up my duty in the White House 4 years ago. It's similar to the assessment that President Biden's team had, according to some of their public statements. And so I think that this is very, very dangerous. That means that we cannot communicate in wishy-washy ways. We need to be very clear in everything that we signal so that he does not mistake what Taiwan is doing. For example, a move to decrease defense spending would be a very negative signal to send to Xi Jinping. It would also be a very negative signal, as I said, to send to President Trump. That's why I'm so glad that President Lai is pushing this special budget. It's very important that the Legislative Yuan backs that. It doesn't matter if you're TPP or KMT or DPP. This is about Taiwan's defense. It's about national security. It's about the safety of people's families and livelihoods here. So that is not one to play politics on. Defense spending has to go up. It has to, because of the signal it sends to Xi Jinping and to Donald Trump. But beyond that, I think that it's also important to use opportunities to try to persuade people who do engage with the outside world from the People's Republic of China, and to put them on the spot and say, is this message actually going to go back to Xi Jinping? And challenge them on that. A lot of these people who come to speak on behalf of the People's Republic are allowed to transmit messages, but it seems that they're not allowed to receive them and to pass them up. And so we need to call them out on that. Anyone who's doing these so-called track 2 dialogues or track 1.5 dialogues, where they're meeting with PRC officials or former officials need to put them on the spot and call them out on the fact that we don't have confidence that what they learn from their meetings with foreigners actually make it up to Xi Jinping. We have to constantly press them on that.
I think one of the major argument in this book is about Taiwan is defendable, but there are works that Taiwanese people, our legislative yuan, our executive yuan, and the different parts of the society needs to work. So it comes back to the whole society defense.
Yeah, and this book's Chinese version is
just out.
Yeah. Behind our back. So I think this is the end of the interview, and thank you, share your insight with us. So I wish that your book not only sold well, but also inspired a lot of actions, not only in Taiwan, but also with our allies, so that can make Taiwan more resilient in the future.
Well, I welcome any criticism of the book, and I hope it spurs some debate.
If I got some comments, I will email you.
Okay, I'll read them.
Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks, Mindy, and thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you. 好，大家觉得怎么样呢？收获很多。
我收获非常的多，然后我觉得他讲的论述也都非常非常的清晰。我觉得最重要的2点啦，一个就是第一个，台湾是可以 defendable， 但我觉得这个论述是他想要对国际的这些 allies 啊，还有美国去强调，台湾是可以，它就是像他的书名一样，这是一个护城河，是护得起来的。但第二个，我觉得他是更对台湾人在讲的一个论述，就是我们对川普释放的讯号是什么？他讲得很清楚，我去跟他讲说，我们 GDP 一直在成长，所以 3% 对我们来讲，每一年的 3% 是不一样的，会逐年太高。但是对他来，他讲得很清楚，川普不会听你这么多的这些细节内容的，他要看到就是台湾有没有呈现 tough 这样子的形象。然后还有他也提到川普不在乎这些技术细节，他更在乎的是这一些数字本身，包括 3% 的，而且不止，还有比 3% 还更往上的这个国防预算，然后以及贸易逆差的东西。所以他看的东西，他不会去跟你聊这些很细节的内容。那我觉得这个是给台湾很重要的警示。那我觉得博明也是少数，我看到美国官员他这么，当然他因为现在没有直接的这个任职，所以他可以很直接的跟我们的台湾的内部讲话。那我觉得他给我们很忠诚的一个忠告啦，就是立法院的状况，我们的国防预算，这不是只是为了美国，而是为了台湾。
就那个数字不是说我们真的是要花多少钱去从美国那边买武器啊，买什么的。那重点是那个数字一搬出来，它就可以达到很多很好的效果了。那我自己的 take away， 我觉得有一段很重要，就是他讲说，我们的人民把自己准备好，我们的军人就有那个意愿去战斗。其实这就是一直以来我在跟我们的观众或听众讲到的，就如果今天我们把自己准备好了，国家才会准备好。那个自己是，即便我们两个坐在这边，我们是个女性，我们没有从军，我们并不是后备军人的其中一份子，但是如果今天我们可以想好是战争发生了，我们两个可以担任什么样的角色？是资讯传递呢？是假资讯的打击呢？还是就算你今天只是一个国小老师，你能不能在混乱的时候去照顾你左邻右舍的小朋友，然后让这一些其他的邻居家大人们无后顾之忧的去防卫这个国家？我觉得那个所谓的全社会韧性讲的就是我们每一个人都找到一个自己可以处理的位置。那在博明虽然这本书它大部分会讲的其实是国防，其实是我们说的 hard power，硬实力，但在那个 hard power 之余，我们虽然是一介平民，但一定还是有我们可以做的事情。所以我很希望这一集专访可以让官员们看到，就是我们的预算，我们的国防是还要持续努力跟对外宣传的。那也希望一般的民众看到之后，你们可以想一下，我们可以怎么样让我们的军人愿意为我们而战，而我们自己也要让整个国家保卫好。
我最后再补充一点，我觉得非常重要的是，博明他讲到就是这个全社会韧性，他的目标不是要去战斗，而是去 deter 吓阻。那我觉得这个是要非常非常注意的一个 bottom line。原因是因为我自己有点担心啦。 就是我觉得全社会韧性是一个很好的词 ，resilient 这个词非常非常的好。但我很怕这个词用之后又变脏话了，就像资讯操作、资讯作战，我觉得这些东西就是不要让它变成政党之间的攻防，这件事情是台湾人的功课。
每个名词走到后面就会变这个样子，但没关系，我们把名词化为行动，把它化为行动之后，就不用担心它会有什么样的攻防了。然后呢，我跟可心在接下来等一下我们关机之后要聊一些心里话，所以如果想要看到我跟可心呢对这场专访有什么心里话的话呢，欢迎订阅敏迪选读的 Apple Podcast， 在会员的专区里面就会有这一集心得咯。拜拜。